Something had already gone wrong long before anyone noticed the clown. It clung to the afternoon like a thin, invisible mist, hiding beneath children's laughter and the restless noise of the city. The park was full, vibrant, careless. People walked as if nothing truly dangerous could exist in such an open, public place. And that belief made them blind. 7-year-old Alara ran ahead along the winding path, her short steps quick and uneven, driven by excitement that refused to settle. Moments earlier she had been laughing, pulling at her mother's sleeve, insisting they stay just a little longer. Her mother, Marwan, followed behind, distracted, weary, grateful for the illusion of an ordinary day. That was when Alara stopped. Near the open plaza, separated slightly from the crowd, stood a clown. His costume was too bright, the colors too sharp against the muted greens and stone of the park. The painted smile on his face stretched unnaturally wide, fixed and unmoving. But it was his eyes that felt wrong. They did not perform. They watched. Quietly. Patiently. As if waiting. Alara stared at him without blinking. People nearby applauded as the clown performed simple tricks. A handkerchief vanished. A piece of fruit changed shape. Children laughed. Adults smiled politely. To everyone else, it was harmless entertainment. To Alara, it was not. She stepped forward. Marwan noticed too late. By the time her hand reached out, Alara's body went rigid, as though something inside her had snapped tight. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Then she fell. The collapse was sudden and violent, her small body hitting the ground with a sound that did not belong in a place like that. For a brief moment, the park seemed to freeze. Then chaos broke loose. Shouts. Running footsteps. Someone calling for help. The clown was already gone. He melted into the moving crowd with unsettling ease, leaving no trace, no explanation, as if he had never been there at all. Marwan dropped to her knees beside her daughter, shaking her, whispering her name over and over. Alara did not respond. Her eyes remained half open, unfocused, staring past the sky above the trees. The sirens arrived quickly. Almost too quickly. By evening, Alara lay beneath harsh hospital lights, thin wires attached to her motionless body. Doctors examined her carefully, repeating tests, reviewing scans, checking vitals again and again. Everything appeared normal. Disturbingly normal. There was no fever. No injury. No visible neurological damage. No reason for concern they could explain. And yet Alara did not speak. The days that followed felt unnaturally heavy. Alara stopped eating. Stopped reacting. The child who once filled every space with movement now barely turned her head when her mother entered the room. Her eyes followed something unseen, drifting slowly from corner to corner. Marwan watched helplessly as her daughter seemed to fade, not suddenly, but gradually, as if something essential was being pulled out of her inch by inch. The doctors grew cautious. Their confidence softened into uncertainty. Phrases like emotional shock and unidentified trauma replaced clear answers. At night, when the hospital room grew quiet, Marwan replayed the moment in the park again and again. The clown. The eyes. The instant Alara collapsed. The memory refused to loosen its grip. A thought began to form. One she resisted at first. What if Alara had not been frightened at all? What if she had recognized something? And what if the reason her daughter was wasting away had nothing to do with illness? By the end of the week, Marwan understood what she could no longer deny. If medicine had no answers, she would have to search elsewhere. And whatever waited there had already been watching them for a long time. The woman waited 3 days before leaving the hospital. By then, the corridors had begun to feel like narrow tunnels lined with answers that led nowhere. Doctors repeated the same conclusions with practiced calm. The child was stable. The tests were clean. There was no medical explanation for what was happening. Marwan stopped believing them. What disturbed her most was not her daughter's silence, but its precision. Elara was not lost. She was withholding something. Her stillness felt guarded, intentional, as if she were protecting a truth too heavy to surface. On the fourth morning, Marwan drove without direction, guided by instinct rather than reason. The city changed gradually around her. Streets narrowed. Buildings leaned closer together. The noise softened, as if sound itself had learned to step carefully. That was when she saw the sign. Small. Hand-painted. Nearly invisible. Only a name. Rowan Graves. Inside, the room was dim and spare. No candles burned. No music played. The space felt used, not staged. Objects rested where they belonged, not where they impressed, stones smoothed by touch, worn decks of cards wrapped in cloth, shelves holding items that carried quiet weight. Rowan Graves sat at a narrow table, already waiting. He did not interrupt as Marwan spoke. He listened without reaction as she described the park, the clown, the collapse, the hospital night spent watching a child fade for no visible reason. Her words carried fear, but beneath it lay something else, unease sharpened by guilt she had never named. When she finished, Rowan Graves reached for a deck of tarot cards. The cards were old. Their edges were soft, their images dulled by time and handling. He did not ask a question aloud. He did not shuffle theatrically. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if the outcome had already been decided. He laid the cards out in silence. The first card spoke of the child's present state. It revealed a figure suspended between two worlds, neither falling nor standing, locked in stillness. Rowan Graves noted that the card did not represent sickness. It represented suspension. A pause forced upon someone too small to understand why. The second card reflected the hidden cause. A broken bond. A separation disguised as protection. The image suggested loss without death, absence without finality. According to the spread, the child's body reacted because her mind refused to accept a lie it could not articulate. The third card showed fear, but not fear of danger. Fear of recognition. The image suggested that what the child saw in the park was not unfamiliar. It was something remembered, resurfacing through disguise. Rowan Graves continued. The fourth card represented the mother. It showed concealment, not cruelty. A choice made long ago to soften pain by rewriting truth. The card did not judge, but it was unforgiving. It made clear that intentions did not erase consequences. The final card lay at the edge of the spread, heavier than the others. It did not promise healing. It offered a condition. Truth restored meant balance returned. Truth denied meant deeper withdrawal. The child would not worsen quickly. She would simply continue to disappear. Rowan Graves gathered the cards slowly. He explained that the park had not caused the collapse. It had exposed it. The child had encountered a symbol tied to what had been hidden from her, and her body reacted before her mind could process it. The silence was not refusal. It was defense. He did not offer comfort. He offered responsibility. According to the spread, only one thing could loosen the hold the child was under. Not medicine. Not reassurance. Recognition. He instructed Marwan to place a living branch beneath the child's pillow. Not as a cure, but as a marker. An invitation for the buried truth to surface. Whether the child would speak afterward depended not on magic, but on readiness. Marwan left carrying the branch wrapped in her coat, unsettled by how little had been done and how much had been revealed. The city resumed its noise around her, indifferent and unaware. That night, beneath hospital lights and steady monitors, she slid the branch under Elara's pillow. The act felt fragile. Inadequate. And yet, for the first time since the park, something shifted. Elara moved in her sleep. Not enough to wake. Not enough to speak. But enough to suggest that the cards had not been wrong. That what had been suspended was beginning, slowly, to descend. And that once the truth found its way back, silence would no longer be an option. The change was subtle enough that no one else would have noticed it. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Nurses passed the doorway without slowing. The room remained the same sterile square of light and quiet. But to Marwan, something had shifted the moment she returned the next morning. Ilara was awake. Not alert. Not present in any way that could be measured or explained. But awake in the sense that her eyes were no longer drifting. They had settled. Focused on a single point near the window, as if the world had begun to anchor itself again, cautiously, testing whether it was safe to return. Marwan stood still, afraid that even breathing too loudly might undo whatever fragile balance had formed overnight. The doctors called it coincidence. They pointed to charts, spoke of delayed stress responses, of the mind protecting itself until it was ready to re-engage. They warned Marwan not to expect progress too quickly. Not to read meaning into small movements. Not to hope. But hope had already found her. It arrived in pieces. In the way Ilara's fingers curled slightly around the blanket. In the way her breathing deepened when Marwan sat beside her. In the almost imperceptible tightening of her brow whenever footsteps approached the room. Most of all, it appeared in the silence itself. The silence had changed. Before, it had been empty, hollow, endless. Now it felt compressed, as if words were pressing against the inside of it, waiting for permission to exist. By the second day, Ilara ate a few bites of food. Not because she was hungry, but because her body remembered how. She drank water when it was offered. She followed movement with her eyes. The staff began to exchange cautious looks. Improvement, they said. Marwan did not correct them. At night, alone in the quiet hours when the hospital dimmed and shadows stretched unnaturally long across the floor, Marwan watched her daughter sleep. The branch remained beneath the pillow, unseen but present, its edges pressing lightly against the thin fabric. It was then that the memories returned. Not suddenly. Not violently. But insistently. Marwan remembered the moment she had chosen to reshape the truth. The conversation she had avoided. The explanation she had simplified until it became a lie. She had told herself it was mercy. Protection. A way to spare a child from disappointment and confusion. The tarot cards had not called it cruelty. But they had not forgiven it either. On the third night, Ilara stirred again. This time, her movement was deliberate. Her head turned slightly toward Marwan. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if the effort required to cross that final threshold was still too great. A nurse entered moments later, breaking the moment. The opportunity dissolved. But it did not disappear. The following afternoon, while the room was quiet and the light slanted low across the floor, Ilara finally shifted her gaze fully toward her mother. Her expression was not fearful. It was searching. Something passed between them then. Not words. Not understanding. Recognition. Ilara's mouth moved. The sound that emerged was barely audible. Fragmented. Unformed. But it was a sound. Marwan felt her breath catch painfully in her chest. She leaned forward instinctively, then stopped herself, remembering Rowan Graves' warning. The child would speak only if she chose to. Pressure would drive her back into silence. Ilara did not repeat the sound. Instead, she turned her face away, exhausted by the effort, retreating once more into stillness. But it was no longer emptiness that surrounded her. It was recovery, slow and uncertain. By evening, the doctors noted the change officially. Speech attempt. Emotional response. Signs of stabilization. Discharge was discussed for the coming days. Marwan nodded and thanked them, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. Because as hope returned, so did fear. If Rowan Graves was right, and everything so far suggested that he was, then this was only the beginning. The child was not healing because the truth had been restored. She was healing because the truth had been disturbed. Whatever had been buried was beginning to surface. And when it did, Marwan would no longer be able to hide behind silence, intention, or justification. The branch beneath the pillow had done its work. The next step would require something far more dangerous. The doctors called it a recovery. They spoke of resilience, of children bouncing back faster than expected, of the mind releasing its grip on fear once the threat had passed. Paperwork was signed. Instructions were given. Smiles returned, cautious but sincere. Within 48 hours, Elara was cleared to leave the hospital. Marwan accepted the explanations without argument. What mattered was that her daughter was coming home. The apartment had been cleaned twice in preparation, every surface wiped down as if order itself could keep the past from following them inside. Balloons were tied to the backs of chairs. A cake waited on the kitchen counter, carefully chosen, carefully ordinary. The date on the calendar had made the decision for her. Elara's birthday. It felt important to mark it. Necessary, even. A signal to the world, and to herself, that life had resumed its expected rhythm. That whatever darkness had passed through them had not won. Elara moved through the apartment quietly, her steps measured, her attention drifting from object to object. She accepted the gifts without excitement, unwrapping them slowly, as if unsure what reaction was required of her. When the cake was placed before her, candles lit and flickering, she stared at the flames for a long moment without blinking. Marwan watched closely, searching for any sign of distress. None came. Relief settled in, fragile but intoxicating. Laughter returned to the room, tentative at first, then freer. For a brief span of time, the past week felt distant, unreal, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. That was when the knock came at the door. It was unexpected, but not alarming. Marwan assumed it was a neighbor, perhaps someone who had heard about the birthday. She did not pause to consider the timing. She opened the door without hesitation. The figure standing in the hallway was impossible to mistake. Bright colors. Oversized shoes. A painted smile too wide to feel natural indoors. A clown, standing beneath the dim hallway light, holding a small bundle of balloons that brushed softly against the ceiling. For a split second, Marwan's mind refused to make sense of the image. Then Elara screamed. The sound tore through the apartment with a force that stunned everyone into stillness. It was not the scream of surprise. It was not the cry of fear alone. It was recognition, raw, immediate, and overwhelming. Elara dropped to the floor, her hands pressed against her ears, her body folding in on itself as if trying to disappear. Her breathing became sharp and erratic. The progress of the past days shattered in an instant. The clown stepped back, startled, his painted expression suddenly grotesque in its fixed cheer. He fumbled, unsure, then retreated down the hallway as Marwan slammed the door shut. The celebration ended in silence. Elara lay on the couch afterward, drained, her skin pale, her eyes unfocused once more. The recovery the doctors had praised seemed to evaporate, replaced by the same fragile stillness that had filled the hospital room. Marwan sat beside her, shaking, her thoughts spiraling toward one conclusion she could no longer avoid. The clown was not random. It never had been. That night, fear turned into anger. Anger searched for a target and found one close, familiar, and convenient. The man who lived with them. The man who had insisted on surprises, on cheer, on pretending everything could be fixed with enough effort. Marwan replayed the scene in her mind until the shape of blame took form. If the child reacted this way, then someone had caused it. And if the tarot cards had shown a man in disguise, then perhaps the answer had been standing beside her all along. By morning, the apartment felt smaller, heavier, filled with unspoken accusations. Elara remained withdrawn, her improvement reversed, her silence restored. Marwan did not return to the hospital this time. Instead, she made a decision that would fracture her household and push the truth further into the shadows. She would remove the problem. Even if she did not yet fully understand what the problem truly was. And somewhere beneath the weight of that choice, something waited patiently. Because the truth, once disturbed, does not retreat. It demands to be faced. The silence returned heavier than before. It did not drift through the apartment the way it had in the hospital. It settled. Pressed itself into the walls, into the corners, into the narrow spaces between thoughts. Elara moved less now. When she did, it was only to retreat, away from noise, away from touch, away from faces that expected something from her. Marwan watched the change with growing dread. Removing the man from their home had not brought relief. It had not loosened the tension coiled inside her daughter. If anything, Elara seemed smaller now, folded inward as if conserving what little of herself remained. The improvement that had begun with the branch beneath the pillow had stalled, suspended once more between progress and collapse. That was when Marwan understood she had misunderstood Rowan Graves. The man in disguise had not been the cause. He had been a symptom. Driven by desperation rather than hope, Marwan returned to the narrow street where the sign still hung. The city felt colder this time, less indifferent, as though it were watching her retrace her steps. Inside, nothing had changed. The same dim stillness. The same objects resting where they had always been. Rowan Graves did not look surprised to see her. Without being asked, he took out the cards again. The shuffle was slower this time. Heavier. The sound of the deck against the table echoed unnaturally in the quiet room. When the cards were laid out, the air seemed to thicken around them. The first card revealed the child once more. Not suspended now, but withdrawn, curled inward, guarding something fragile. Rowan Graves noted that the silence had returned not as defense, but as resignation. The second card exposed the root of the wound. It showed a figure walking away while another remained behind, reaching out into empty space. This was not abandonment in the physical sense. It was disappearance by omission. A presence erased rather than lost. The third card turned the weight onto Marwan. It showed a woman holding something close to her chest, her face turned away from the truth behind her. Protection through concealment. Love distorted by fear. Rowan Graves did not soften his interpretation. The child's suffering did not begin in the park. It began years earlier, the moment reality had been rewritten. The moment a living connection had been declared dead. The child's mind had accepted the story, but her body had not. It had waited. It had remembered. The fourth card revealed the clown again, not as a threat, but as a symbol. A disguise. A mask worn to approach without being seen. According to the spread, the child had not been terrified by the figure in the park. She had recognized him. The final card lay between consequence and release. It offered no easy resolution. Truth could restore balance, but only if it was complete. Partial honesty would deepen the fracture. Continued silence would turn the child's withdrawal permanent. Rowan Graves gathered the cards slowly, deliberately. He made it clear that rituals and symbols could only open a door. Walking through it required action. The truth must be spoken. Not softened. Not delayed. Not reshaped to spare feelings. The child would need to face what had been hidden from her. And so would her mother. Marwan left with no branch this time. No object to place beneath a pillow. The cards had stripped away the last illusion she had clung to. On the walk home, memories surfaced unbidden. The arguments she had avoided. The explanations she had simplified. The story she had told a grieving child because it felt easier than admitting betrayal, abandonment, and unresolved love. She had called it kindness. The tarot had named it something else. That night, Marwan sat beside Alara's bed and watched her sleep, the rise and fall of her chest shallow but steady. The branch still lay beneath the pillow, now powerless without the truth to support it. Marwan understood then what Rowan Graves had been preparing her for all along. The child would not heal until the lie was undone. And undoing it would require something far more terrifying than silence. It would require confession. And once spoken, the truth would not only change the child. It would dismantle everything that had been built on the lie. Because some wounds do not come from what is taken away. They come from what is buried alive. The decision was made before Marwan allowed herself to acknowledge it. Truth, once named, did not wait patiently. It pressed forward, demanding form, demanding action. And the tarot had been clear, there was no healing without confrontation, no restoration without exposure. The man behind the mask had to be found. Marwan returned to the park at the same hour, on the same day of the week, as if repetition itself might summon what had been hidden. The weather matched the memory too closely for comfort. The same muted light. The same careless crowd. Parents watching their children with the same misplaced certainty that nothing could reach them here. She scanned every face. At first, there was nothing. Just movement. Noise. Ordinary life continuing without pause. Then she saw him. The clown stood near the fountain, slightly apart from the others, his posture familiar in a way that tightened something in her chest. The costume was the same, bright, deliberate, false. But now, knowing what she was looking for, Marwan could see past it. The way he watched the children was not predatory. It was restrained. As if he were measuring distance rather than intent. Marwan did not approach him immediately. She stood back, observing, letting the truth settle into place. The tarot had shown recognition, not fear. Memory, not threat. And as she watched, she saw it clearly. This was not a man playing a role. This was a man hiding inside one. When the moment came, it was unremarkable. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just the quiet inevitability of two lives colliding again after years of deliberate separation. The mask came off indoors, away from the park, away from witnesses. Without ceremony. Without relief. The face beneath it carried the weight of time poorly spent, regret etched deeper than age alone could explain. This was the man Alara had never forgotten. This was the man Marwan had erased. He did not defend himself. He did not accuse. He spoke of distance disguised as responsibility. Of absence justified as necessity. Of watching from afar because being near had felt impossible. The costume, he admitted, had begun as a way to be present without being seen. A compromise between guilt and fear. The park had offered anonymity. The mask had offered safety. For him. For Alara, it had offered recognition without context. Truth without explanation. A shock her young mind could not process, but her body could not ignore. Marwan listened, each word dismantling the version of reality she had constructed for years. The lie she had told had not protected her daughter from pain. It had postponed it. That evening, Alara watched from the doorway as the man stepped into their home without the mask. Her posture stiffened, but she did not retreat. Her eyes fixed on his face, searching, comparing, aligning memory with reality. Recognition passed through her like a quiet current. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not hide. She stepped forward. The sound that left her this time was not fragmented. Not accidental. It was deliberate, shaped by effort and certainty. A single word. It landed heavily in the room, altering its gravity. Something inside Alara loosened then, finally allowed to fall into place. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The silence that followed was no longer defensive or resigned. It was complete. Later that night, after explanations had been given without embellishment, after questions had been answered without avoidance, Elara slept deeply for the first time since the park. No branch beneath her pillow. No ritual performed. Only truth, laid bare. Marwan stood in the doorway and understood what Rowan Graves had known from the beginning. The tarot had never predicted an outcome. It had revealed a structure. And now that structure had changed. But not everything was resolved. Truth restored balance, but balance did not mean simplicity. There were consequences still unfolding, choices yet to be made, and wounds that would not close neatly. The mask was gone. But the future, unhidden at last, would demand something even harder than confession. It would demand responsibility. And that reckoning was yet to come. The house felt different once the night settled. Not lighter. Not easier. Simply altered, as if the walls themselves had shifted to accommodate a reality they had been denying. Truth had a weight of its own. It did not disappear after being spoken. It stayed, pressing gently but persistently, demanding to be lived with. Elara slept through the night. There were no sudden movements, no murmurs of distress, no restless turning beneath the blankets. Her breathing was deep and even, the kind of sleep that comes only when the body no longer feels the need to stay alert. When morning came, she woke on her own, her eyes clear in a way Marwan had not seen in months. The silence was gone. Not replaced by chatter or laughter, but by presence. Elara moved through the morning with quiet intention, no longer avoiding faces, no longer shrinking from the space she occupied. She ate without being asked. She watched the world with curiosity instead of caution. The change was unmistakable. Yet healing did not arrive alone. With it came decisions that could no longer be delayed. The man who had worn the mask did not attempt to reclaim what he had abandoned. He did not demand forgiveness or proximity. He accepted limits. Distance. Time. He understood now that presence could not be improvised, and trust could not be staged like a performance in a park. What mattered was that he remained visible. No disguises. No symbols. No half-measures. For Elara, this was enough. She did not need perfection. She needed consistency. She needed truth that did not vanish when it became inconvenient. And with each passing day, the tension she had carried dissolved, replaced by something steadier, security built not on promises, but on reality. Marwan watched it happen with a mixture of relief and reckoning. She had believed for years that love meant protection through silence. Rowan Graves had shown her otherwise. Love, she now understood, required honesty even when honesty threatened to dismantle everything built around the lie. There were moments she thought of returning to the narrow street, to the dim room with the worn tarot deck. But she knew there was no reason to go back. Rowan Graves appeared only when truth was buried. Here, nothing remained hidden. The branch beneath the pillow was gone. The cards had served their purpose. The structure revealed by the tarot had shifted, not into something perfect, but into something real. And reality, though fragile, was survivable. Weeks later, when Elara laughed again, softly at first, then freely, Marwan understood the final lesson the story had been leading her toward. Children do not fear the truth. They fear being cut off from it. The park returned to being just a park. The clown became only a costume once more. The memory lost its power to wound, stripped of secrecy and confusion. What remained was not a happy ending. It was something more durable. A family redefined. A bond restored. A silence broken not by force, but by honesty. And somewhere else in the city, Rowan Graves continued his quiet work, waiting for the next door that would open only when someone was ready to stop lying, to themselves, and to the ones they claimed to love.